Okay, welcome back again. We're going to have a look at the final part of the worksheet on shareholders' rights. Now, we've looked at the start of this through section 36, and we finished off here. And the point we made was, the question we asked now is, can we give shareholders different rights? Now, the answer to that is no, not if they're in the same class of shares. Now, a class of shares is a group of shares, or more specifically, a group of shareholders. If you think of an analogy of a classroom situation, if you're in one class and you're doing group work, for example, then the lecturer might say the groups can be up to 5. Now, that rule will apply to everybody in the class, so you wouldn't have different rules in the same class where some groups could be 2 and some could be 10. If the rule is 5, that's the maximum for everybody. Now, when you go to another class with a different lecturer, different type of group work for various reasons, then the rule might be groups of 3. People don't really have a problem with this because they're in different classes, different rules in different classes. And it's very much the same thing when we start talking about shares. So if we have a company in our whiteboard here, so we have a company and we have shareholders, let's say A, B, and C, and D, E, and F. So we have these 6 shareholders, and we want to give them different rights. So these shareholders, we might say they can vote, and here we might say no vote. Now, for example, on appointing directors, we could be more specific than just saying no vote. Now, we can't do that if we actually just consider these as one group of shareholders or one class of shareholders. But if we break them up and we have, let's call them a class A and a class B shareholder, then we are allowed to give them different rights. Now, the point about this, though, is under our rules, the default in the Companies Act. What is the default situation? It's quite simply that we have all shares being one class with all the same rights. And if you want to create different rights, you have to, in your constitution, say there will, for example, be 2 classes of shares. There will be a class of shares, and they will have voting rights on appointment of directors, and we'll have a B class, which will have no vote on the appointment of directors. Now, these people, for example, might be investor. So they're investors. So let's say they put the money in and they want a particular return on investment. So we'll give them preferential shares, meaning they get first dividend. And we might have a dividend policy that says they get a 10% return before anybody else gets anything. Percentage there. Now, we're fully entitled to do this under the Companies Act. So think in your business plan, do I need to give different people different rights? How do we create the different classes of shares? In our constitution. So again, that may mean you need to change the constitution. And to change the constitution, we're going to have to go back to section 32, and we're going to have a vote to adopt, alter, or revocate a constitution. So in this case, it will be an alteration, and you'll have to pass a resolution, and you'd have to get a minimum 75% vote to do that. Now, classes of shares are, in the Companies Act, referred to as types of shares. Now, if we go back to the Companies Act, we look at section 37. Right, so subject to the constitution of the company, different classes may be issued in a company. Now, subject to the constitution means we create those classes in the constitution, but we also might create rules that say you cannot have new classes of shares. That's an option. And you'll notice it says without limiting subsection 1. So in other words, these are just examples. So we can add as many different classes as we like to achieve our commercial objectives. So they could be redeemable. Redeemable meaning I can go to the company and say, buy my shares back. Or the company may be able to say to you, we want to buy your shares back. Those are the two types of redeemable shares. You could have preferential rights distribution, conditional voting rights, or not confer voting rights. Or for example, we could have an E, which says voting rights for appointment of directors. We can do anything, creating a list down here as long as it doesn't breach the Companies Act. Okay, so can we add extra types of shares? Yes. Can we prohibit certain classes of shares? Yes. So this is about creating protections for existing shareholders. But you need to be careful because you are restricting the ability of the company to raise capital. Now here we have some examples where we consider why would we make these sort of changes? Preferential to dividend but no voting rights. So it might be an investor. So they're putting in capital equal 20% of the company, and so they don't get voting rights, they don't become directors, they simply want to get paid first. So the dividend policy of the company might provide that preferential shareholders get paid first up to 10%, and they may also be preferential to return of surpluses at the end of the company's life. Here we have a company has two classes of shares, Class A and Class B. Class A has 70% of the voting rights, Class B has the right to appoint two directors. Now, why would we do that? In that particular example, if we use our whiteboard up here again, and we'll just get rid of everything. In our company here, let's say we have Class A and Class B, which is the example there. And so this Class A here, they had 70%. These people, Class B, have 30%. Now, going back to our facts, 70% and Class B has the right to appoint two directors. Now, why would you do that? Now, if you think about this voting, it's 70% to 30%. So these people have majority. So if we simply have our votes set out like that, then who gets to appoint directors? And the answer, of course, is A has all the rights in terms of appointing directors, and B has no directors. Now, to overcome that, we can give this class the right to appoint two directors. Now, the facts don't say how many directors they are, so these people might have, let's say, 5 directors. Could be any number, of course, because they have the advantage. Now, typically in our Constitution, we say how many directors. So let's assume the Constitution says 7 directors, and these people have to have 2. Now, clearly they don't have a majority, so they're going to get voted against. But because the directors are in the board of directors, they get access to all the information, so they can protect the interest of the minority shareholder B, who otherwise would have no rights to get access to information or to vote on any director decisions. In this example, Class B shares are redeemable. So the company can require the company to buy back their shares. As I said, Section 68 gives 2 forms of redemption. One where the shareholders can ask the company to buy its shares, the other where the company can ask to tell the shareholder, we're going to buy your shares. So Class B shareholders, let's say there's only one, is an investor which has provided finance to the company by investing as a shareholder. So they put money into the company, but they want the ability to get their money out if, for example, the company isn't performing, or maybe in 3 years the company has performed very well and it's time to cash out. So unless you do this in different classes, so let's say this is our investor class here, so they might have redemption. Now, all that means is they're going to say at some point, and say it's after 3 years, and it's at whatever the market valuation is. So 3 years down the track, they say, we've put our money in, now it's time to get it out, revalue the company. They put in $100,000 for their 30%. Company's performed well, it might be worth $300,000. They make a large capital gain. Equity investors and venture capital companies commonly do this. ANZ Equities, which is the capital branch of the ANZ Bank, they also like to use redemption shares or redeemable shares. So they invest for a time but have an exit point. So it's very much about how do I get out? You can think about that in a lot of ways as well. If the company hasn't been performing well, then a shareholder has the option to say, buy my shares. So they get an exit. Otherwise, they're left with no real options other than trying to sell shares in a company that's not performing, which doesn't work very well. So what all these things are doing is creating a set of tools you can use to achieve an outcome. Okay, so we'll